Well, welcome to Front Porch Conversations here at Advent Christian Village. I'm thankful that you joined in today, and I know that you're going to enjoy getting to know Bill Storey a little better. I am, as we have had some conversations, and I'm looking forward to today's conversations. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you.
Would you start at the beginning? Where were you born, and tell us a little about your early life?
Okay, I was born in Detroit, Michigan, the same month that the stock market crashed. But personally, I don't remember either one of them. But I was born and raised in Detroit, went through all the public schools, and worked in high school. So because in those days they didn't have student loans and things, and I wanted to get to college. I remember sitting as a young kid saying, I'm never going to be this poor, because during the Depression nobody had anything. So I'm going to go to college, and I'm the first male to go to college. I have a sister who's older. She did go to college, but it was part of the Detroit public school system. In those days, it was called Wayne University. Now it's called Wayne State. But I decided I would go to the best school that I could afford to go. I was going to work my way through college, so I went to the University of Michigan. And I graduated, and I went on, and I entered the service from the University of Michigan. I did not take ROTC, but I did get called to active duty during Korea. And I went in the service, and I carried a rifle as a private in the infantry in the rear rank of the 10th Mountain Division, and I went from private to sergeant to second lieutenant. It took me a year, and they had a board of officers because the school that I went to was called the Officer Candidate School at that time. The only way you could either go to West Point or you take ROTC or this Ground General School. And they had a board of officers because I did very well, fortunately. And they gave me the same commission of a West Pointer, but I didn't go to West Point, so I was a regular officer. So then I went on and worked myself up to being a full colonel, Army, regular Army. And oddly enough, I was told here recently that my name is on the Hall of Fame up in Fort Benning, Georgia, because very, very few people ever have worked their way up from private to full colonel Army. So basically, I had almost 30 years service, and it went all over. And
so have you been to see your name on the wall at Fort Benning?
No, I haven't. The thing is that now that's, except for West Point, Fort Benning is the only way you can get a ROTC. Fort Benning is the only place that you can get a lieutenant commission now. And in the old days, the Ground General School where I went to at Fort Riley, Kansas was the only place that you could get that. Yeah, so I entered the service, and I served in many things. My father used to say I was the dumbest guy in the Army because they were always sending me to school.
But you got a broad education that way.
Well, I'm a graduate of a lot of schools in the service, but quartermaster, I'm a logistician is basically, but I was trained as a combat officer also in those days. And what happened is that we did all kinds of assignments, and I went to not basic officer, advanced officer. I went to Command and General Staff College, and also graduate of the Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and which you have to have. And then I served on the highest staff in the Army and the Pentagon at the Assistant Chief of Staff of the Army's office, which incidentally, after a year's successful service at that level of staff, they award a medal. And it fits right here. It's called a liver patch, but it's green. It's the most beautiful medal that you have, but you can only get it after you've served on the highest level of staff. And I have one of those. But anyway, I became a troubleshooter for the Army. They kept sending me to do things. And then not only that, they were going to make me a lawyer. But then they decided not to. The Congress had too many congressmen had too many sons who were lawyers being drafted as privates, and they didn't want that. So they stopped sending regular officers to get law school. So instead, they sent me back to the University of Michigan, and I have an MBA from the University of Michigan. In fact, my little class ring, which I still wear, says in 1960 I got an MBA.
I noticed that. I was going to ask you what it was for.
Well, that's it. I used to wear a wedding ring, but when my wife passed away, I decided I'd get the class ring out. It's a little smaller than most of them are very massive, but this one is smaller. I like it smaller, and that's an aquamarine stone in it, and I like it. So I don't feel so naked, but I don't have it because I had wedding rings for almost 60 years.
Well, why don't we back up a minute?
Okay.
You were talking about you wanted to go to college because you didn't want to be poor. What was a pleasant childhood memory?
My father and I going fishing. We used to go fishing a lot, and my father was off during the Depression years. And I always thought how wonderful it was that he would take me fishing. We'd go fishing. After I was growing up and we talked about it, he said, well, you know why we did that? So we had something to eat. But we used to go fishing, and I really enjoyed that very much. And we traveled. Oh golly, we bought an automobile in 1934, which was unusual, brand new Chevy. It cost $700, and we would travel. And that's an interesting thing because I stumbled in reading. I was very slow, and so we took this trip across country of several thousand miles from Detroit. And my sister and I have a sister who's 5 years older than I am, were sitting in the back seat, and she decided that they were going to teach me how to read. And in those days, they used to have what they called Burma shave signs alongside the highways. You know, there was a boy, he was named Joe, but now he is no more for what he thought was H2O, was H2SO4. Anyway, so she'd say, keep your head ahead, straight ahead. Now, right side, what did that sign say? And so it ended up that after that summer, I could read very fast. In fact, it stood me in very good state. And years later in the Army, they tested people because they felt that you had to read. And it turned out I could read at about 700-800 words a minute at about 75% comprehensibility. And they thought, oh, gee, that's great. They set me aside and he said, we're going to give you some special training. So when I finished, I'm slowed down now, but I can read about 1,900 words a minute at about 80%.
Wow.
And so I, unfortunately, well, it's pleasant, but then unfortunately I can read a whole book in an evening, and which is kind of tough. But anyway, so I took up. I've been a writer all my life, so I write books and nonfiction. But my latest book is fiction.
Where did you meet your wife and how?
Okay, my wife and I met as freshmen in the Spanish class at the University of Michigan. And I sent her a little note, and I said I could speak Spanish a little bit because I had some in high school. And I sent her a note, and I said, I'd like to study with you. And she said, well, she sent a note back and said, well, for the good of my Spanish. Okay, so we met then, and later on, and we dated. And we were married between our junior and senior years. She went on, she had a degree in education, early education. And unfortunately, she had a terrible immune system. She had polio, ovarian cancer, and MS. And she had MS even in college, and nobody knew how to diagnose it. And that is what eventually got her. But we were married 48 years. We have 3 children who are alive and well. But she passed away in 1998. And then some years later, I remarried again. And we were married for about 12 years. And she passed away here in the village last year. And so, oddly enough, very incidentally, they passed away almost on the same day, 20 years apart, in May. Kind of a sad but interesting coincidence.
What was your favorite thing that you did in the Army?
Oh, golly. I was a deputy commandant of the quartermaster school, and that's what I retired as. And we had 23,000 students a year, and we taught all kinds of subjects from parachute packing, delivery, office machine repair, computer-assisted instruction, television instruction. But we also had a culinary arts program. And when I commanded units, I always made sure that our food was the best thing going, and we won a lot of awards. And so we got that culinary arts, and we had a program that is no longer in existence. It was called the Enlisted Aids Program, where we trained all the chefs for all the commands worldwide, NATO commands and diplomatic commands. And these guys had to become really great cooks and chefs, really. And they were so good, and they had programs where we went and they competed, and I thought that I had to get smarter, so I became a food judge, so that I could help out on some of that, although I never taught the thing. I am a gourmet chef as a hobby, and so I enjoyed that really well. Great assignment. And fortunately, I worked for wonderful bosses, and I filled a 1-star general spot, and the commandant was a 2-star general. So.
And where did the Army have you lived through all those years of service?
Well, I spent a lot of time in Indochina, and I had 3 tours in Vietnam, which I can address. But basically, I lived stationed in Hawaii, Alaska, a lot of things. I only moved 27 times in the almost 30 years, and it seems we were always moving. But we lived in Virginia, where the headquarters of the Quartermaster Corps is at Fort Lee, Virginia. We were there most of the time. But I would never served in Europe, although my responsibilities were worldwide for logistics, and so consequently I had to travel to Europe. I had a program. 2 of my people went to work for the British government, and 2 of their people came to work for me. So I would go to Aldershot, England, south of London, and visit them. They have a tremendous culinary arts program. In fact, one of the guys that worked for me was a major. His name was Norman Nash, nickname of Tank, and he became the brigadier in charge of the British Catering Corps before he retired. Super guy. They had super people. They selected their people very well, and so did we. And then, of course, I did mention Vietnam. I spent 3 tours there, which is part of my disability, but which I have. And I was there an advisor in 63 when the president was overthrown. I was there in 68 to straighten out a computer problem for American troops. And then, unbeknownst to me, the State Department asked the Department of Defense for a colonel that could come over to know what's going on in Vietnam, and that couldn't be corrupted. How my name came out, I still have not figured out. My name came out. I was sent to the State Department, and I was over there. I was with the embassy in 74, 75. I was there when it fell, and I was evacuated on a Chinese Cathay Pacific airliner with Garrett Utley and the NBC News team. The plane was half empty, and we flew to Hong Kong.
Oh, my goodness.
And then eventually to Hawaii. But that's an interesting assignment. I love the Vietnamese people, but they also have people that were really difficult. And here's an interesting fact that most people don't know. Ho Chi Minh, who was the head of things, I had a friend, Dr. Bernard Fall, who he wrote a book, Street Without Joy, but he basically was a consultant to the State Department. He knew Ho Chi Minh personally, so I like to learn a lot. Ho Chi Minh, when he was young, was a cook in Boston at the Parker House, and he made Parker House rolls. And most people don't know that. And the other thing that most people don't know, he liked the United States. He hated that we were in war, at least initially anyway. And so what happened is when they wrote the Constitution for North Vietnam, if you take it and look at here and you look at here, our Constitution, it's almost identical. Most people have never heard that.
No.
But Ho Chi Minh they called him Uncle Ho. He was a very interesting guy who used to make Parker House rolls.
Well, I've enjoyed some of those.
So have I. So have I.
After your retirement from the Army, what was next in your life?
Well, I was taking care of a very sick wife, caretaker. However, I took up writing. I had written all my life as kind of a highlight. I wrote outdoor articles, hunting, fishing, and I got very active in recreational vehicles. I don't know whether you're familiar with the Airstream travel trailer, the bullet-shaped thing. I was the president for that organization here in the East, and we traveled all around, and I did a lot of things with them. In fact, I wrote for the Airstream publications. They had a thing called the Caravaner and the Blue Beret, which were house organs that they wrote about, and they sent to their people, and I wrote for them. And I was with the group that in 1978, we took 250 Airstreams to Mexico for the winter, and it was called The Best of Mexico, and I wrote the document that talks and chronologically tells about that story, and we went all over Mexico to all the various places, and then I also met them. They had they called it Around the World. It went from Malaysia through Singapore up into Europe, 26 Airstreams. They traveled all over in those days. It didn't cost as much as it does now. And so, in fact, recently where they opened up Cuba, everybody said, oh, this is the first time in years anybody's gone to Cuba. We had an Airstream caravan. We had a roll-on, roll-off ship down in Miami. We rolled the vehicles with towing the Airstreams, and we went to Cuba when Batista was still in power before Castro in Cuba.
My goodness. Have you had the opportunity to go back to Cuba since then?
No, I have not. I have no desire to go to a former country. It's just like Vietnam. I have been asked several times to go back because so many of the people, they said, oh, the people are no longer alive who were during the war. I said, I don't care. I don't want to go back. I don't want to see any other things. I've often wondered that when we were evacuated, I had a mobile home at Tonsanute Air Force Base, and being on a diet, I had trouble getting sugar-free stuff, and I had just gotten a brand new case of Fresca soft drinks, and I had just gotten, and we evacuated. I often wonder what the communists did with the whole case of Fresca soft drinks in my mobile home. They obviously took care. We had 40 mobile homes there, and it's an interesting thing. One of the couples who live here, and my neighbors here, Bill and Lucy Hine, they lived in the mobile home 2 doors away from me during 1974. I used to play paddle tennis with Lucy. Bill was always working. He was in the Air Force. He was a controller, and he was working night and day. But Lucy and another wife from the embassy, and they would play against us. We had a paddle tennis court right there in the center of these mobile homes, these 40 mobile homes that we played there. I hadn't seen them since 1974.
And you discovered that once you were here?
Yes. And then I said, I know that name. In fact, another person here, I have written for the RV magazines for years and years and years, and I met this couple. She was just getting started. Her husband was a commercial charter pilot. His name was Gordon. Their last name is Green, but they spell it Grene. And so Janet and her husband, I met them. They lived in Destin, Florida, and her mother lived with them. And I stopped to talk to them. She was just starting to write for our RV magazines at the time that I did a lot of writing for. And I was so envious because they had a beautiful 30-foot sailboat, and they had a little diesel motorhome called a Hanamag diesel. It's been donated to a museum in Tallahassee. And I said, gee, in the winter they would go to the Bahamas, and in the summer they would take their motorhome and travel. I really liked it. So I knew her. I met her before we moved here. I went to see her to talk to her about it.
She's still writing travel.
Yes, for cruise lines particularly, yeah.
Fascinating lady.
Yeah, she does. And Gordon has since passed away, but in fact, the last I was talking to her, she said she really misses Gordon because he used to schedule everything for her and all the trips and so forth. And now she has to do all that herself. Travel is not easy, if you think about it. This last Christmas, I went on a cruise to the Caribbean. It was a lot of work from Fort Lauderdale. And I'm scheduled to go on another little small boat on Lake Michigan in August, middle of August. It travels all around the Lake Michigan, Holland, Michigan, and a couple of places that I've been before because I'm from Michigan. So, but yeah.
I have a son who lives in Michigan.
Really? Whereabouts?
He lives in Grand Ledge, right outside of Lansing.
Oh yeah, I'm familiar with Grand Ledge.
And I had never been to Michigan until he moved there. 12 years. We have seen a lot of Michigan, and it's a beautiful state.
It is a beautiful state, and my wife was from Petoskey, Michigan, which is up near the Straits. And as I said, we met as freshmen in Ann Arbor, Michigan, at the University of Michigan. But we traveled there, although we never retired there. We retired to Florida, as a matter of fact, from St. Augustine. We lived in St. Augustine for a bunch of years.
Well, how did you learn about the village?
Well, that's an interesting thing. We looked for a place that we wanted to live. We knew my wife had Alzheimer's, our beginning stages of it. And so we knew we needed to have something. So we searched the whole country. And things we had looked for many years before for my mother-in-law to stay in, because she lived in Winter Haven, Florida, like Penny Farms and Julington Creek and the villages, not the villages, but the Presbyterian village in Orlando area, and also Shell Point, the National Christian Alliance, and then the Hancock in Texas, and a couple in Vancouver, Washington, not Canada. And then where my sister lives, she lives in Aldergate up in Charlotte. We looked at all these places. We actually stayed in. In fact, we actually physically moved into the one in Fort Myer. But what happened is they all had terrible buy-in prices. And you think, oh, you get over that. But then you got to look at the maintenance, and they hide that from you. For example, Shell Point is for a couple now is about $5,000 a month. And you say, who can afford $5,000 a month? I can't. However, I was looking stuff, and I do have a lifetime subscription to the Officer magazine, and they have a thing about retirement places. And here was an ad that they had placed from the village. So I called up and I talked to the people here at the village, and Karen Thomas was one of them, and Pam, and we talked about it, and we talked back. So at the time, we had an island home in Whidbey Island, Washington, and we had a winter home in Yuma, Arizona. We were snowbirds, and I couldn't keep up with that with my wife. So we said, well, let's look at this. So we flew here, and we looked at the thing and talked to Janet. I saw her name, and I said, oh, I'll go talk to Janet. And so we looked at that, and we looked at everything. We said, well, the only thing we didn't like about the village, you can't get to the airports very easily. So we said, we're going to substitute this for Yuma, Arizona. When we went back to our place in Washington, we decided to sell our place in Yuma. And then we got to thinking about it, and there was nobody left. My wife's sister used to live on the island, moved back to Indiana. And so there was nobody there, and my wife said, let's sell out everything. So we sold out everything, and we moved here. And we sold our house in Washington, sold our house in Yuma, Arizona, and we moved here in November of 2017. And that's why we came here, because we don't have a buy-in, and we are able to pay monthly fees and so forth. And we were going to build one of the new houses, but they were a year or so behind. So we ended up with one of the new townhouses. Now they call them cottages, I guess. But anyway, they're one-story townhouses out on Taylor Commons. Mm-hmm. So that's where we live. That's why we moved. And of course, very fortuitous, because although Alzheimer's has a unit, it wasn't Alzheimer's, it was infection that got my wife finally. And so, but she was in the nursing home for a couple of weeks. So that's how we got to the village.
Well, I'm glad you did.
So we have a real nice neighbors where we live, and we have a lot of things. And I try to do a lot of things. For example, I got the church to authorize me to start a singles group, which we call it, we say it's not a hymn sing, it's not a prayer meeting, and it's not a dating service. We just get together. And you may have known this, but there used to be a group here called the Romeos. Did you ever hear about
that?
them?
Did not know that.
Well, everybody, that's a wrong name because they were all guys, but everybody said, oh, Romeos. And what it really stood for was really old men eating out.
I've heard that saying before, but I didn't know there was a group here.
Yeah, there was a group here, and unfortunately, because of the age of our people, things through attrition, they ended up closing up. But I started this fellowship group. We meet, in fact, we're meeting tomorrow night. We meet on the last Saturday night at the cafe. Sometimes we go to places like O'Neill's Country Buffet in Madison, and other places. But we basically eat, and then what we do is we order from the menu and order whatever you want, pay for whatever you want, so you don't have a high-priced dinner if you don't want a high-priced dinner. And then we ended up talking about it. Our last month meeting was, we like the little kids program. Make a wish. If you could have anything you could wish for, regardless of money, I think, what would you do? And we went around and talked to everybody about it. It's interesting. We about half the number of our members or people who come are women, and half of them are men. And we just have a great time. And I'm looking forward to this Saturday night because we're going to talk about some other things.
And you aren't going to tell anybody, huh?
Pardon?
What's the topic?
Oh, basically it is, okay, if we're following up on this best wishes thing, we said, now, if I could do something for you, what would you like me to do? And we go around and ask every people. Because one of the problems that we have is that when Pastor Art Stone filled in, he had the first of his few sermons was dealing with love. And I went to talk to him, and I said, we really need more of that. And I said, it's in everything, and in this village and in other places. I don't care whether you're a bank clerk or you're an individual who does the maintenance or anything else. But for example, let's just talk about a meal. When a person hands you a plate, I want you to be able to say, I know that plate's got love on it. And that's the thing, and the smile and the love in the hand. And that's the key. And Pastor Art said, boy, Bill, he said, that really is true. And in fact, you may have been here, but I said, well, you know what we did in our church? Incidentally, I'm a Presbyterian, but I've been an elder for 55 years. And we had a church on our island, and what we did is during the service, just before the service started, we'd stand up and get along, and we wanted to give with a handshake or a hug. Meet somebody that you don't know, to say, God loves you and so do I. And we did that. And I told Art that, and he did that in our sanctuary one Sunday. He said, look to the right, look to the left, and said, hey, God loves you, so do we. And that's the thing, because you need love in everything, and you need Christian love in everything that you do. And unfortunately, we have a lot of people who don't believe that. All over, everything, whether you deal with a paper subscription and the Swanee Democrat, which they lost the whole bundle of newspapers this last week, so we didn't get our paper, to all kinds of things that they don't really understand that you have I don't want to call it sympathy, but empathy. Put yourself into the thing of dealing with the people. And that's what it takes, and that's what it takes, and that's what makes a village. And that's what makes a Christian place where you can go and enjoy yourself. Although I sure wish we had restaurants that had more meals of variety, because I'm an international cuisine, and I like things, although I do go to Bigwood and Live Oak a lot, but and we do some things, and we cook here. You may or may not know about it, but last year in the fall, I did a 70-pound pig for the people in there.
I heard that, yes.
Yeah, we got kind of famous for it. In fact, my oldest son, who's a pilot with American Airlines, flew in from California to help overnight because they have to cook it all night long. And it was very famous. And everybody says, when are you going to do another one? Well, it's going to be a long time before we do another one. But we do smaller things, and we get together. Because it's all part of the deal of dealing with the camaraderie and the feeling. Because we have so many people that are so tied up in their lives that whether it's illness, medications, or what, they don't want to break out and do anything different. And I'm trying to get them to do some things different.
Well, and that's what one of the things we're trying to do with our Front Porch Conversations. Maybe somebody heard something you said today that will be a spark to them.
Well, I hope so. In fact, I've talked to some people. I'm disabled. Actually, I'm 100% disabled according to the VA. But my mind says I'm 25, but my body says, no, you aren't. You're a lot older. And so consequently, what we want to do is to do some things that we'll do. And I get calls that I'm gluten-free, I'm nitrate-free, I'm lactose-free, and casein-free. So I eat what they call a pine float, which is a toothpick and a glass of water. But we have a good time, and yet through this, I've met people who call me up from Dowling and said, hey, look at, what about this? And so we exchange recipes in the garden, and also I made the beehives for the garden here. I have 3 beehives that we're getting bees this summer and putting in to take care of the pollination of all the flowers and vegetables we have here in the village. And we have a big hive down at by the garden area.
I'll have to go see it. I didn't know it was there.
Well, don't get too close.
I won't.
It's on the far end. It's on the north end. We have most people don't. You have to sight it so the entrance is to the east, and that your back is to area and insulated. And we're getting some bees. I belong to the Taylor County Beekeepers Association, and one of the guys, Theron Moore, is furnishing us some bees for our hives to start from scratch. Because we've had traps out. We have traps out to trap, but this has been a terrible year to trap bees. The bees have not been overly productive, and they only are trappable when they make a swarm and they move away because they have overgrown their own hives, and we didn't have any of that happen around here.
Thank you. And thank you so much for being here with us today.
Well, I appreciate being able to come and talk with you. Thank you, Ann.
Please join us for future Front Porch Conversations. Thanks for joining us today.